The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Cultural Competency webinar. We are going to get started in just about 2 or 3 minutes. We'll wait to see if anyone else is signing on, and then we will go ahead and get started momentarily. Okay, hello everyone. It is just a bit after 2, so we are going to go ahead and get started. My name is Catherine Chivers. I am the Community Engagement Coordinator here at NAMI, California, and I will be facilitating the webinar today. This webinar is part of a 3-part series in our cultural competency training. However, you do not have to have taken other cultural competency trainings for this to be meaningful for you. Though they are, I'd highly suggest them, and we do have a bunch of other going on. You'll see that this one is webinar 2. Don't worry if you haven't taken 1 or 3, or if you're doing that at a later date. They don't need to be taken in order. They can stand alone as cultural competency trainings as well. And I'm really excited because this is actually my favorite of the 3 because I find that it's most interactive. And I feel like when I first did it, I got a lot out of it, so I hope that you all will as well. I do want to make a note, and I will make a note of this also at the end of the webinar. There may be some of you who are taking this webinar to fulfill a cultural competency requirement for your NAMI affiliate because of funding through the county, I believe it is, or another funding source which requires a cultural competency training. So in order to earn a certificate in cultural competency, you are going to need to stay with us throughout the whole presentation, and then also I am able to see your level of interaction, or if you're actually watching it afterwards. So if I notice that you haven't really watched it the whole time, then we will be unable to give you the certificate, but hopefully that won't be a problem for anyone. So I think that's all. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to first go over some brief group commitments. So these cultural competency trainings are really wonderful, but we also do talk about some difficult topics. And so I find that group commitments are just helpful. We can refer back to them if we need to. So thank you all so much for taking the time out of your day. I want to say that the only way this webinar is going to be impactful or successful or helpful for you all is if you are all interacting and listening attentively. I know that it's really, really tempting to put on a webinar and then go off and do something else. I hope that won't be the case today because we have a lot of interactive portions, and really the success of the webinar depends on you all and whether or not you're able to ask questions, give comments, and also respond to the polls, which I'll go over later. Also, I hope we're all coming into this with an open mind so we can speak honestly. We don't have to worry too much about sharing the space in terms of not speaking too much when another individual is speaking, because this is a webinar, obviously. Confidentiality, I will not say your names unless you are okay with that. If you have a question, you can just type it in. I may read it out loud if it applies to everyone, but I will not identify you. So take the learning from this webinar and leave the names if any names are said to respect people's confidentiality. And finally, reserve the right to change your mind. I find that this webinar is a little challenging for folks. I know I found it challenging, especially hopefully you all were able to complete the IATs, the implicit association tests, some of those, because those can be kind of jarring, or maybe not so much depending on your results. But just keeping an open mind is the way you're going to get the most out of this webinar. So I'm going to do quick learning objectives. We want to go over some terminology. We're going to talk a little bit about mental health disparities and what that means, and then how kind of we can help reduce those. And then we're going to talk a lot about unconscious bias and the difference between implicit and explicit bias. And so that's why I really hope that all of you were able to do those IATs. Hopefully you should have all gotten an email from me. If you did not, we will have a break. So if you wanted to take one of those really quickly, then you can during the break. It should be in your email if you were, I believe I sent the email out yesterday. So as long as you were registered by yesterday, you should have received it. Okay, so we are going to start off with our first interactive portion. So please bear with me because sometimes it takes people a little bit of time to be able to navigate this. So this first poll will take a little bit longer, and then hopefully all of the other polls will be able to go through quickly because people will have already have it set up. So it can be a little confusing, so if you haven't used the poll everywhere. So basically what's going to happen is that you are going to be able to respond to this poll either via web, on a computer, or via text message through your cell phone. So also, I should note that it is completely anonymous. When the responses come back to me, they don't show who you are, and they actually block out your phone number, so no one knows who you are. It's completely anonymous. So for this one, I would like to make a word cloud. And so just to get us thinking about culture and kind of get us into this cultural competency mindset, I want you to think about what words come to mind or phrases when you think of culture. And so in order to submit those responses, you can look at these two lines right here. This top line is for if you would like to respond via computer. You're going to open a new window in Internet Explorer, Firefox, Google Chrome, or whatever search engine you have, where you would type the URL. That is the www address. You are going to type this, pollev.com/NAMI Californ 886. If you would like to respond via text message, you can use your smartphone, and what you're going to do is pull up a blank text message, like you're going to write a new text message to someone. And where you would normally put the contact or the phone number, you're going to write 22333. So if I'm normally sending a text to my friend Amy or something, instead I'm going to put, instead of her contact info, or number, I'm going to put in 22333 where the phone number goes. In the body of the text, where I would send my actual message, you're going to write NAMI, California. Note it's not California. For some reason they shortened it. It's NAMI California 886. Once you type that in the body of your text message, moments after, you're going to receive a text message back welcoming you to the poll and letting you know that you have joined, and also giving you instructions on how to leave the poll once we are done. So hopefully you all can try and do that now. I'm going to give you all a couple minutes to do that. Shoot me a question if you have one, and I can help troubleshoot with you all. Okay, thank you. I just realized that my window had been frozen, so none of you all are seeing this. Thank you. And one individual just brought that to my attention. So we're probably going to have to go over that again. Thank you so much. My window was frozen, so I apologize. I had a couple other slides, but the window was frozen, so it should be going now. So I will go over the directions one more time because it's not very helpful if you can't see the screen. So if you are responding for the poll via computer, you're going to use this top line, and you're going to, where you would type the URL, type pollev.com/NAMI-California. And then it should pull up the page, and you can type in your responses, and just type in words and phrases, and you can type in as many or as few as you would like, and it's going to make a word cloud. And then if you would like to respond via text message, where you would normally put the contact information or the phone number, you're going to put the number 22333. In the body of the text, you're going to write NAMI, California 886. And then after you send that, you send it to 22333 using the message NAMI California 886. It will welcome you to the poll. For those of you who are just joining us, please let me know if you have any trouble with this. I do want to let those of you know that have just come on, just in case you didn't hear it in the beginning. If you all are on here to be certified for a cultural competency training in order to receive funding sources. Oh, we got some, I'll go over that in a sec, but yay, we got some people coming in. Awesome. So if you are looking to gain a certificate after this webinar, then I need you to stick around for the whole webinar. That's the only way I can give you a certificate. And I also need you to be at least just a little bit attentive. That's all I really ask. Obviously, as attentive as you can be is great. But if I've noticed that you really haven't watched any of it, I unfortunately will be unable to provide you with a certificate. So hopefully that won't be a problem for anyone. Oh my gosh, I'm loving this. Sometimes people have a lot of issues, so this is great. And if you are having an issue, please let me know. I'm going to give you all just a few more seconds to type in any more answers or shoot me a question if you're having trouble getting into this poll. And I will say that moving forward, we're going to have other polls, so you can keep up this. No need to leave the poll if you're in the text message, and you can keep up that other screen if you're doing it on your computer. Okay, so let's take a look here. So culture, the biggest one we have, so the bigger ones means that multiple people have entered it, is language. I think that, yes, that is definitely a huge one. That is in the name of this webinar, and it's something we're definitely going to be talking about today. I think it's also interesting to note that when we think of cultural competency, sometimes language is our main focus, when in reality, there are so many other aspects to it. So hopefully we can touch on some of those today. Okay, I'm going to go over, because I've had a couple of questions about logging onto the poll, and hopefully this will help, and then we will move on. So if you are using a web browser, you're going to type in pollev.com/NamiCalifornia886 into your URL. And once you reach that web page, you should be able to type in responses. If you are using your cell phone, you are going to, where the phone number goes, you're going to put 22333, and in the body of the text message, write NAMI California 886. After that, you're simply going to submit your answers as if they were text messages. So afterwards you can, and each will send as a different answer. So you can write some of the answers we've already had are gender, beliefs, customs, and you can send those as text messages through the Poll Everywhere message that you've already started, and then those will appear on the screen. And if this hasn't been helpful, let me know, and I can try and troubleshoot with you. Okay, so it looks like some of the biggest ones we're having are, like I said, language, ethnicity, race. Competence is a great one because that's what we're obviously doing today. Experiences. Yeah, we're going to talk a lot about lived experience and what that means in relation to cultural competency. Groups, humility. I love that. Humility is a really, really good one. In order to employ cultural competency, you really need to have that foundation of humility. And preferences, connections, beliefs, customs, community. Awesome. Yeah, lots of connecting. I really like that. Awesome. Okay, so if you weren't able to join this poll, hopefully you'll be able to join the next one, and I can always help you out on that. But for right now, we're going to move on. This is a great way to get us started thinking and to get us on the right path. Oh, please excuse my computer. Okay, there we go. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to start out with this quote. So you have your way, I have my way, and as for the right way, the correct way, and the only way, it does not exist. So let's think about this in terms of perspective, because oftentimes people's thoughts are very much influenced by their perspective or lived experience within the world. So I want you all to take a look at this graphic. Okay, so we have this checkerboard and then a green cylinder there. And I want you to take a look at the squares that have letters in them. One has an A and one has a B, and look at those A and B squares. And you don't have to answer this anywhere, but just think to yourself, are A and B the same color, or are they different colored squares? Not the actual letters, but the squares. Are they the same color, or are they different? So if we take a look at this same image, and I put a color bar there, we have the original image on the right, and the new image with the color blocking bars on the left. And what we actually see is that A and B are the same color. And that this cylinder is kind of playing a little bit of a mind trick on you and is distorting the way that you're seeing A and B, and is making it so it looks like they're different colors. And really all this is just to say that thinking about perspectives is so important in terms of cultural competency. And understanding that these lived experiences shape our perspectives. And so something that may seem obvious to us, such that A and B are completely different colors, may not in fact be true, and we may need to look a little more closely. So, quick outline of this webinar. The part one, we're going to go over some terminology and talk about some cases as well. We're going to have a short break. Depending on the time, I'm definitely one of those, let's push through and get it done, but I do want to give you all a break to use the restroom or get water or whatever you need. And then part two, please stick around for this. It is my favorite. So we're talking about unconscious bias and then a little bit of key terms and definitions, but I don't want to focus too much on that. I want to focus on the fun part, which for me is the unconscious bias. I think it's really, really interesting. And then we're going to kind of put it all together and talk about, well, what does this actually mean for our work here at NAMI or for whatever organization you are working for. So talking about, in this part one, we're going to talk about some healthcare disparities and then key terminologies. Culture, as per that word cloud, it looks like you all have a very strong grasp on what culture is. Shared values, beliefs, practices of a particular group, and obviously we know that cultural groups have infinite number of subgroups, and that culture is very generally defined, and individuals can belong to more than one cultural group. A minority is simply any ethnic or racial group that is smaller than the majority. This could also be applied to not just ethnic and racial categories, though it most often is. You could apply this to the LGBTQ community, to certain socioeconomic groups and such. Also, people who have different abilities. It's a really broad term, but it's most often used to describe racial and ethnic minorities. So, cultural competence. What is cultural competence? So, we want to talk about how, when we think of cultural competence, and for those of you who are getting the certificates for today, though I love that counties and different funding sources are requiring us to be quote-unquote culturally competent, I find that getting a certificate or some sort of document that says, okay, we've completed it, really misconstrues what cultural competency actually is. I really wish I could say that after this webinar, all of you will be culturally competent and you don't need to do anything else and it's a check, boom, done. Unfortunately, cultural competence is way more than that. Being culturally competent is an ongoing learning process. If you're really culturally competent, cultural competency does not stop. It will evolve over time. It will develop because you are constantly learning and gaining awareness about different cultures, how to be culturally sensitive to them, culturally inclusive. And also, it is completely impossible to know about every single culture in the world, and that's not what we're trying to do today. We're trying to help you understand how to employ empathy to work with people across cultures. And so what it really requires, this last bullet point, is that organizations have some sort of standard within them so that they are adhering to cultural competency. Some of those standards vary. One of them are the class standards, which are the culturally and linguistically appropriate service standards. And those are used to guide organizations to be culturally competent. That's one example of some sort of a measure your organization can use. So cultural sensitivity, very, very similar, but less of a process and more of just an idea. And so I think what I really want to focus on, I should have put this first bullet point in red, but is really this word awareness. Awareness is huge. Awareness of cultural differences without assigning a value to the differences. So simply understanding that there are cultural differences and letting that be okay. There can be a lot of times where we maybe want to go the colorblind route. I'm not sure if any of you have heard of this terminology perhaps, but a person who says that they are colorblind is basically an individual who says, I don't see race, I don't care if you're purple, green, black, or white, I love all humans. And while that is wonderful, we don't live in a society that is void of racism and homophobia and all of the other structural things within our society that discriminate against certain groups of people. And so taking a colorblind approach is actually denying that racism is really still very rampant within our society, and it's something we still need to work against and fight against. And so oftentimes when we're trying to be quote unquote politically correct, we want to stray away from differences and say, oh, I just see you as a human. And that's awesome, and I know that comes from a really well-intentioned space, but unfortunately, it totally negates the fact that these structural discriminations, such as racism, are deep within our society, and we need to acknowledge them in order to fight back against them. So ethnicity Ethnicity, if you can think of ethnicity and race, obviously those two are so paired closely together when we're talking about things. I always try to think ethnicity is a little more based on culture, where race is more based on skin color. Though they can totally overlap and integrate. You can have multiple ethnicities, whereas most of the time you'll only have one race, but if you're biracial or multiracial, then that's not true. So it really depends. And yeah, just helping to define one's identity. It's very associated with culture, cultural brokering. So cultural brokering is really important to cultural competency work because it can really help you get into communities that you may not already be serving. So cultural brokering is basically the act of trying to mediate between groups. You can have cultural brokers who are individuals from the community you are seeking to serve, who you can seek out and ask them for advice on how to reach their community or how to best work with them or what do they need or what services do they need. And it's really about trying to bridge gaps between, in this case, between NAMI and then other cultural groups that maybe NAMI wants to serve more that we're not serving already. So acculturation. Acculturation is basically this degree to which someone who is from outside of the United States culture, how much they have adopted these values. Well, we're saying in the U.S. because that's where we're all located in California, but this could be applied to other places. But being acculturated means that you have, well, it's varying degrees, but the degree to which you are complying or taking on or adapting to the mainstream culture in the United States as opposed to your culture of origin or wherever you came from. So there are different levels. Like I said, there's different levels of acculturation. There's different degrees. And so enculturation is basically saying that you are adapting to the prevailing cultural patterns in society, which is often very necessary in order for people to get along in the world or in this new place that they are living in. And so adaptation to the prevailing cultural patterns can often be a means of survival or necessity. Assimilation is basically the idea that whatever the minority group is or individual who's not from the U.S. has completely adapted the body in the cultural body, in the new society. That is to say, if I immigrated here from Brazil, and I've lived in Brazil my whole life, and I come over here to the U.S. and I adapt all like cultural norms that are in America. I don't speak Portuguese anymore. I'm really trying to just live my whole life in terms as an American, then that would be me assimilating to a culture. And there's also such a thing as forced assimilation, which is basically this idea that we can think of it, a great example, well, it's a very sad example, but an example of it is Native American assimilation, and basically when settlers were first coming in and stripping them of they weren't allowing them to speak their language, to participate in their cultural practices or spiritual practices. They would take them to religious boarding schools and not allow them to see their families in order to create these Native people into quote-unquote Americans and strip them from their previous or native identity. So there are a lot of other terms. I'm not going to go over all of this because I don't want to be a dictionary for you all. I think one term I do want to go over is ethnocentrism. That's basically this idea where we put our own culture, whatever that may be, as the norm and focus on that, and kind of every other culture or everything else that exists around it is really kind of abnormal, and if it doesn't adhere with my cultural norms, then it's something I'm not interested in, or that is, as I said before, that is abnormal. And marginalization, I like to picture this in my head of kind of the people who are on the sidelines, those in society who lack power or privilege because of some aspect of their identity, whether that is race, gender, sexuality, ability, geography, education level. The list goes on and on. Okay, so I'm just going to move on because that slide kind of covers it here. So what do we mean by healthcare disparities? We've talked about, marginalization and all different groups and how that kind of can impact you, but what are healthcare disparities and what does NAMI have to do with that? So basically, healthcare disparities are, the difference in availability or accessibility of healthcare services based on some aspect of your identity. So I don't necessarily love the definition it gives below right here, this third bullet point, because it says that health status disparities refer to the variation in rates of disease occurrence and disabilities between socioeconomic and or geographically defined populations. However, health disparities go far beyond just socioeconomic or geographically defined populations. They impact populations based on race, based on sexual and gender identity, and based on their ability. I know it touches on disabilities here, but it also impacts based on your ability in the beginning, not a developed disability, but the level of ability you have come into the world with. And so I think that this idea of healthcare disparities can really be much more expanded to encompass all of these different groups and how their lack of privilege will impact their access to healthcare. And I do want to say that what I mean by privilege, so privilege is some sort of an unearned benefit within society. It doesn't make you a bad person or mean that you try to get privilege and use it negatively. I know oftentimes when we talk about white privilege, that can cause individuals who are white, including myself, to become very defensive because it is kind of seen as a very negative thing. But unfortunately, we didn't choose to have this privilege, but it is important to acknowledge it and understand the ways in which we can use that privilege to help benefit others who may not have that sort of privilege. It doesn't mean you're automatically racist or a bad person or anything like that. It's simply an unearned benefit because we do not have to deal with racism and race relations related to that, those types of things on a daily basis as opposed to people of color. So what do we know about healthcare disparities? So the CDC has found 4 kind of major findings, but these are just some examples of what a healthcare disparity is. So the prevalence of adult diabetes is higher among Hispanics and non-Hispanic Blacks and those of other mixed races than Asians and non-Hispanic whites. So those people of color, excluding Asians, and obviously non-Hispanic whites, are less likely to have diabetes, and that's due to a huge mix of factors, which we've kind of touched on, but it's race, it's geography, it's ability, it's acculturation, it's all of those that impact the way in which those individuals most impacted, such as Hispanics and non-Hispanic Blacks, are impacted at a higher rate of a higher prevalence rate, thank you, of diabetes. So let's look at some other examples. And so I do want to note that mental illness is in some ways like having diabetes, and so that's why we can definitely make the comparison here. But if we're looking at some mental health examples, men are actually far more likely to commit suicide than women. I think that possibly one of the big things is that though men, specifically white men, are not well, you could have other aspects of your identity that are marginalized, but your average white male is not going to, cisgender white male who is straight is not going to be considered a marginalized individual. However, they still have negative norms within society that are impacting them and cause them to commit suicide at a much higher rate than women. One of those we can think of is this whole idea of what a man needs to be within U.S. society, and how it is very, very much, well, basically men are very much told from a young age that they should not express their feelings and that they are to keep everything inside and that they need to be tough. And so this ultimately impacts their help-seeking behaviors for mental health. And then for both men and women, suicide rates are highest among American Indian, Alaska Natives and non-Hispanic whites. So for the Native population, I think I touched on that earlier, but a huge factor that basically impacts these high suicide rates are intergenerational trauma, and that is basically from being stripped of their culture and surviving through genocide. And though that was many years ago, we still have many examples of how the consequences of that persist in daily life in some of these communities. So for African Americans, this is another example of a health disparity. So poverty levels affect mental health. We talked about that earlier. Socioeconomic status helps to define what a health disparity is. So those African Americans living below the poverty line as compared to those over twice the poverty line are 3 times more likely to report psychological distress. And we can think about how all the psychological distress that comes from living below the poverty line and having struggles on a daily basis so that you can't worry about higher, you could say higher needs, because you're worried about how you're going to get food on the table or get your children's diapers or get the basic needs that you need access to in order to live a healthy and happy life and to reduce this psychological stress that otherwise occurs. So they're also 10 times more likely to report having serious psychological distress as compared to non-Hispanic whites. We could also say that's probably a lot of that has to do with the racism that is apparent within our society and those encounters and microaggressions that happen every single day. And that's just one example of one of the possible root causes for this. So I'm not going to go over all these stats because hopefully you all are getting the gist by now. But I will say that, so we talked about this a couple slides ago, but suicide is very prevalent, really sadly, in the Native community. And so in 2014, suicide was the second leading cause of death for Native people aged 10 through 34. And that's crazy. That is the second leading cause of death. And so we can think about all of these factors historically and in present day, the marginalization, the racism, the being stripped of their culture, a history of genocide, lack of access to resources, so many other things that are impacting these communities and causing these terrible, terrible health disparities. So why do these disparities exist? Because I couldn't help myself, I've started to touch on a lot of the reasons, but here are some that I have already kind of discussed, but we'll go over. Socioeconomic status, geographic location. Do you live in a part of town that's near a factory that's emitting fumes that is more likely to cause asthma or some sort of cancer because you are low income and that's the only place you can afford a house? race, the impact of racism or lack thereof, your ethnic background, perhaps whether or not you're an immigrant, whether or not you are undocumented or documented can be a huge stressor on your psyche. Historical trauma, I touched on that. That is the trauma that is passed down generation through generation. We can think of historical trauma in a lot of Black communities because of the history of slavery and racial discrimination, just as I touched on in Native communities. Gender identity and sexuality, homophobia and transphobia are going to have huge impacts on the psyche of LGBTQ individuals on a daily basis, and whether or not they even feel safe to, say, hold their partner's hand in public can be just a huge barrier to living your full self. And then ability is a huge one, and also your access to or ability to have had education. Oh, and good, immigration status is there as well. And again, this is a good list to start, but there are so many other factors that impact healthcare disparities, but these are a good list to start us off. So now I want to look at a case discussion. But before we do that, we're actually going to take just a 2-minute break because I'm going to pull up this video. So take 2 minutes and I will have this video ready for you. And then we're going to talk about that. I have a few things that I'd like you to think about through the video. So take 2 minutes, use the restroom if you need to. Let's see what time it is. It is, okay, it looks like it's 2:41. So we'll be back at 2:43, 2:44. Okay, so welcome back, everyone. Hopefully you were able to take a quick break. I would like you all to take a look at the screen now. I pulled up these questions for you all to take a look at. And I'd like you to think about them while we are watching this clip. I'm not going to show you the whole movie, but it's a documentary about aging in the LGBTQ community. And it's pretty self-explanatory. But what I really want you to think about during this is, what if I was in the patient's shoes? We're going to see the stories of some patients. And what if you were perhaps maybe a family member or a loved one of these individuals, or you realize that your organization wasn't serving or reaching this group? How would you feel if you were actually the one that was the healthcare provider? How would you feel? What would you do? Would you feel like you're doing your job, or how could you do it better, or how can you help these people? And then also, how can you help bring about change within this situation? Because ultimately, that's what we want to talk about with cultural competency, is moving towards and creating change in order to be more culturally competent so we can better serve all of these diverse communities. So we're going to go ahead and watch the video. Remember to take those questions into consideration. I would definitely love to hear back from you afterwards, so we'll go ahead and listen to this now.
A lot of people believe that you just live happily ever after, and that just is a myth.
People like ourselves, older, are hiding in nursing homes or whatever because they are scared to death. It's incredibly common to go back into the closet again.
You just know when they don't want you there.
We've heard about homemakers going in, taking out a Bible and having the elder pray and asking for forgiveness.
And to be cured. It's not too late for you to be cured of this. They go back in the closet. She might mistreat me or abuse me.
They're so afraid of it, they are resisting any kind of medical attention.
That person was in their mid-20s during the McCarthy era.
The closet was the norm.
They could lose their job, they could lose, families.
We were sick.
We were
considered sick.
People were involuntarily hospitalized in psychiatric facilities.
Even electroshock.
The degradation of these people is so complete that their sex satisfaction comes only in being tortured themselves.
I was on the route to the nut farm.
So there's a real distrust of mainstream institutions.
I would never put myself in danger.
He became much more fearful of people knowing that he was gay.
You're not leaving now.
Not right now.
LGBT elders are more likely than the general population to age alone because many gay elders never had children, have not had great relationships with their families of origin. There would be a higher degree of sort of alienation and isolation.
My family was the reason I existed, and I lost them all. If they ever choose to catch up before I die, I welcome them.
LGBT aging issues are an epidemic. There's a small and growing group of us.
We're trying to go into the existing network so they become more inclusive. One of the most common lines we get is like, we don't have any gay elders here.
If I wasn't the only person responsible for Alexander, I would have ended my life.
This is our life.
Good to see ya! Hi! We'll be there in a few years.
I built the stairway paradise with a new step every day. We have a whole generation of people who don't know who we are. That's really sad, because you're missing out on a lot. We know a lot. We did a lot for you. You wouldn't be here if it weren't for us.
Look at him scrawny. Too bad I don't have an open casket. Well, there'll be no open casket. There won't be anything, right?
If we are saying come out and be filled with pride, it's our responsibility to make sure that continues right through their last day.
Oh, I just realized that I think my screen was frozen again. Okay, I am so sorry. Okay, so if y'all could respond to me, I'm sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties. But it looks like you all were not able to see the movie. Are you able to, let's see. Okay, it looks like it's not frozen now, so I really apologize for this, everyone. Let me look at these questions and hopefully, no video. Okay, oh man, okay. So I am actually, is there sound? Okay, someone thought it was audio. Okay, I am so, okay, so we heard the sound but didn't see the images. Oh darn, okay. Oh my gosh, I am so sorry. Okay. Thank you all for all of your help. So I think as long as you heard the audio, I think you should be fine. I will send in a follow-up email and I will provide you all with the link so that if you want to watch the video after, oh, no, we don't want to watch it again. So that if you all want to watch it on your own, hopefully you all were able to hear it. Again, my apologies for these technical difficulties. Hopefully we won't have any more of those. Okay, and now hopefully you should all be able to see my slideshow. That's what it's telling me. If for some reason you can't see the slideshow, though, please let me know. I am so sorry about that. So based on what you heard, because obviously we couldn't watch it, I'm so sorry. I would love to hear some of your feedback if you just wanted to type me a question. So really the most important part was the audio and what they were talking about. Obviously the video is much more powerful if you actually see it, but really what they're discussing is this whole group of individuals who are now older adults and are often going into home care facilities or into nursing homes and have lived through an era with extreme homophobia, which is hate or fear of gay people, and then transphobia, which is hate or fear of transgender individuals. And so basically what it's talking about is that they've lived through that and lived through an era where LGBTQ rights were something that was still being very much fought for. Obviously, it still is today, but it was in a much more nascent stage. And so now that they're going into these nursing facilities with individuals that they don't necessarily know or trust taking care of them, they are actually going back into the closet. And I was talking about how isolation is a really huge factor for older adults in general, and especially for LGBTQ older adults who may not have had supportive families. So I think some of you are typing some questions. I'll give you a minute. So type any questions or any comments that you have. Is this something you knew about? How do you see this as a health disparity? What could we possibly do to make it better? Awesome. Okay, so we have one individual that says, it was really great to hear. I never thought about older adults in the LGBTQ plus before becoming more isolated. Wonderful. That's what I'm hoping. We really today just want to kind of open your eyes to the different possibilities and different health disparities that are out there so that we are more aware of them. Or even if we don't, we're not obviously going to learn all of them, but we come in with a working knowledge that groups may be experiencing or people may be experiencing discrimination that we never even knew about. Okay, so another individual said, I heard about this from a clinician, and it is really sad that they have to hide who they are, and the sad thing is that there may be setbacks to any progress they may have made. Very true. We can only continue to create welcoming environments. Wonderful. Thank you so much for your thoughts. If anyone else has any thoughts, please let me know. These are great. Yeah, I think it's older adult LGBTQ populations, for those of you that know it, or have heard of that before, that's awesome, but it's definitely an issue that we don't touch upon enough. Okay, it looks like some individuals had a hard time hearing the audio of the film, so I will send out a link for that. Really, the takeaway from it is that these individuals don't feel safe and are now going back into the closet as they're older adults going into nursing homes. And basically how some of them expressed how they were refusing medical care because for fear of someone outing them and then either being discriminated against or experiencing abuse. Elder abuse is sadly really, really common, and then you compound that with an older adult LGBTQ individual, and they're going to most likely experience a lot more discrimination than just other older adults because of their sexual or gender identity. And hopefully we think things are getting better, but we need to constantly work towards that. So we're going to move on now. Okay, so we've already kind of touched on this, but this is just really to say that we need to account for people's lived experiences, their age, their race, their geography, their language, their education, and we don't need to memorize this all in one day. We can't sit down and say, okay, this culture likes this and this and this, and this age culture likes this and this and this, and these are what we need to do for them. Obviously, we need to know more about communities we want to serve, but one of the biggest parts of cultural competency is simply being aware that there may be things that you don't know until you speak to that individual that you seek to serve. So these, I think, are really helpful just to kind of look, just from, a purely almost kind of stereotypical standpoint, because we're just seeing their faces, we don't know anything really about them, but just to see the diversity of individuals who are here at NAMI and all of the communities that we are trying to seek to serve, different ages, races, genders, ethnic identities, cultures, immigration status, and just how important cultural competency is to create a safe environment where individuals feel comfortable accessing services, and their services that are really relevant to their needs and to their culture. So we're not going to do this additional exercise because that's most likely when we're in person. And so since we already took a 2-minute break, if it is okay with everyone, I am going to keep going. That way we'll probably get out a little early instead, and I always find that on the average, participants tend to appreciate getting out earlier than having a long break. So we're going to keep going, and hopefully that is okay with you all. If you need a moment, obviously it's okay to step away for a minute. That's totally fine. Go ahead and do what you need, but we're going to go ahead and get started on part 2. So part 2 is my favorite part. Like I said, it is the unconscious bias part, and I'm very excited to talk about this, and I really want to hear back from you all. So get ready to type in your question box so we can have a little discussion. So I want to know if all of you were able to access this implicit bias assignment. When you registered for the webinar, you should have received links to 2 videos that you were supposed to watch, and then also to this IAT, or implicit association test, which looks at unconscious bias. And so I'm going to go right now to a poll to see how many of you were able to. If you weren't able to complete the implicit bias exercise, that is totally fine. I would definitely suggest completing it after this webinar at some point. I honestly find it pretty fun, and the insights can be really great. Also, you should have received an email, hopefully yesterday, with a reminder from me about the implicit bias exercise. So, okay, I love the honesty. Thank you. Great. Keep those answers coming in so that I can know if you all were able to. And if you weren't, that's okay. Honesty is totally, that's what I would rather have you be honest with me so I know what I'm working with. So this is great. Looks like a lot of you did get to do it. We'll wait to see if anyone else is going to chip in, and then we'll move forward. Okay, so I will say that the videos that I sent in the email, it's one individual let me know they weren't able to see them. The videos are helpful, but the way more important part is going to be the implicit bias exercise. I will do a brief overview of what that is after these polls, so that you all know. But there are a couple polls here just to learn about what you all thought of the implicit bias test, or even if you were able to take it. So we're going to move on to the next slide. Thank you all for responding. So for those of you that did take it, I found the exercise helpful, or it increased my knowledge of what bias I may or may not have. So ideally, you took a couple of these. If not, no worries. Again, I would really highly recommend taking these even if you were not able to previously. So instead of typing in a word like the word cloud before, you're going to type in A, B, C, D, E. Okay, awesome. And disagree. I really appreciate the honesty. Thank you. And we have one agree, so we're kind of all over. And agree. Okay, awesome. I'll wait to hear from a couple more people and see what they thought. I will let you all know, as we're waiting for responses, that I know that when I took the IAT, I was very defensive about it because I got an answer that I didn't think reflected my actual thoughts. And so actually that's something we're going to talk about and go into more. So we're going to move on to the next page, the next poll, which is, this is for everyone, whether or not you took or were able to take the test or the experiment. So I have experienced or witnessed bias playing a factor in decisions for my own life or in the lives of people around me. And so that's for everyone to answer. Please let me know what your experience has been. Okay, wonderful. So it looks like most people have, or according to this, most of you, okay, yeah, most of you have experienced or witnessed some sort of bias. If you haven't, that's okay. Just be honest. But most of you said that you have, so that's really unfortunate. But it's good to come in with that working knowledge. Okay, and so one individual, awesome, I love this. One individual responded that they said that they felt themselves being a little bit defensive as well for their responses to the IAT, and I think that is a completely normal response, and I think it's just best to acknowledge that. So thank you so much for your honesty. We're going to move on to the next poll, so thank you. It looks like most people have experienced or witnessed some sort of bias. So I feel I know of the tools to navigate bias as it comes up. A, yes, B, maybe, and C, no. So do you feel like if you were in a situation where you were witnessing bias, you would kind of know how to navigate that situation to mitigate the bias? Or do you think you have those tools, or maybe not? Let me know. Okay, awesome. I love the honesty. Thank you so much. So most of the people, it looks like, are kind of in the middle. We have some no's. And you know what? This is really reflecting something very positive about you all, because even if you had said yes, I would say that there's always room for us to improve all the time when it comes to bias, because it is something that is constantly changing and shifting, and something that's so kind of ingrained in us within society that we may not even notice that it's happening. So I love that you all are aware that maybe you don't know all of the tools to navigate that, and that you're being honest about that. I think that's absolutely fabulous. So let's move on to the next poll so I can hear from you all. So I feel comfortable using all tools to navigate bias every time it comes up. So maybe you have learned some tools previously, or a previous cultural competency webinar training, and you feel like every time you have bias or you witness bias, that you're able to navigate that. So it looks like we have some not sures, a lot of not sure, a no. I really appreciate, I can't stress enough how much I appreciate the honesty. Because there's one thing knowing the tools to navigate bias, and then also a whole other thing of even feeling comfortable doing so. So that can be really hard. Awesome. Okay, so it looks like mostly not sure and some no. So thank you guys so much for your answers, your honest answers. I'm just going to see if someone had a question really quickly. Okay, so let's move on to the next. So what I want to hear about now, this is for those of you that were able to take the implicit association test. I would love to know what topics you tried, and how, if at all, do you think the findings, basically what score it gave you or the results it gave you, impact you? And really any other thoughts just regarding the IAT. So for those of you that weren't able to take it, the IAT stands for Implicit Association Test. And basically what happened is that psychologists in the 70s were starting to notice that when they were doing tests regarding bias and discrimination, when they were just asking people, hey, do you like one race more than the other, or do you like one gender than the other, or associate, better things with a certain race? And people would answer no most of the time. But then the researchers were kind of perplexed because they were like, but we're seeing all these instances of bias and discrimination, so how are we not capturing that, when we're talking to these participants? And basically what they realized is that there's a difference between implicit and explicit bias. So explicit bias is something that you can tap into consciously. It's something that you think about and yes, I have a bias towards X, Y, or Z. I can tell you about that. I may not want to tell you about that because I may be a little bit embarrassed, but I can consciously access that information and know that deep down, yes, I do have those biases. And I will say that we all have biases, no matter what our identities are, simply because of the societies we live in and the structural nature with that and the norms that are put upon us. We all have bias, and it's more just that we need to recognize that. And so implicit bias is basically some sort of an automatic preference that we're not able to consciously tap into. We may not even think that that's something that we have. And so basically what the IAT does is that it measures this kind of implicit bias or this automatic response through pairing groups or identities with different adjectives. So for example, one of the most popular IAT topics, and they have them for all different topics, is whether or not you have a preference towards white people or Black people. And so basically what the IAT will do is that you will have to press two keys and you will be sorting pictures it has little pictures of faces, cropped faces of men, and they're either a man of color or a white man. And so you have to sort those. One side will say white and one side will say Black. And then what you ultimately have to do is later, as the test goes on, and it's all randomized every time so that you're not having some sort of a priming effect that's skewing the results. And so basically, then what it will do is it will come up with good and bad words on the screen. And so it will tell you, okay, this time you need to associate good with the white side and bad with the Black side. And for the majority of people, as per this UCLA study, the majority of people have some sort of either a slight to moderate preference for white people, in that they more quickly associate and are able to tap the key when good is associating to white and when black is associating to bad, than the alternative of when they need to categorize black as good and white as bad. And they capture this if you see your result, or some of the studies that they've done. I don't think it gives you in the results, but these are tested by milliseconds to really try and capture that implicit bias that we're not consciously thinking about it, but it's something that's been stamped into us in society. So I would love to hear from you all what topics you did, or even if you don't want to share the topics, you don't need to share your results. You can if you want to, but I know that that can be sometimes uncomfortable. Just any thoughts you had about it. Maybe you didn't like it. Maybe you thought it was really cool. There's no right or wrong answer. I just want to have a little discussion from you all. Okay, so one individual was saying that they took the race and the weight tests. So race was the black preference for black versus white. And then the weight tests I find are pretty interesting. It's whether or not you have a preference towards thinner or larger individuals. So they also have them for disability, for presidential preference, for gender bias as well. And for those of you that have taken it and maybe were feeling, a little bit defensive like I was feeling, I definitely want to tell you just like a brief story that I hope will help us to understand that just even if we don't get the perfect score that we wanted on the IAT that says we're completely politically correct, it's okay, and it's just something we need to acknowledge and work towards. So I'll give you an example from my own personal life. So I completed my undergraduate degree in women's studies, and I also have a master's degree in women's studies. So if you can't tell already, I am very passionate about feminism and racial justice and all of those sorts of things. And I am very much a huge proponent of equality and equity for female identified individuals. So this only happened a couple days ago. The other day I was listening to NPR and they said, okay, we're going to give you a riddle and we'll see if you can figure it out. And so some of you may have heard this before, but the riddle that they told was that, okay, so a father and his son are driving and they get in a car crash. The father is killed in the car crash and the son is severely hurt. And so they take the son to the hospital, and then when the surgeon comes in to operate on the son, the surgeon says, I can't operate, that's my son. And so they posed this question to a bunch of individuals, and as some of you may be right now, of course, I kind of primed you with my background, so maybe you're not. But when they talked to all of the individuals, and including myself, I was like, I don't get it. Like, the father is dead, so how could the surgeon say that's the son? Was he adopted, or is it some, a non-traditional family structure? And so then what I slowly realized was that I had completely overlooked the fact that surgeons can be women, and that was my own implicit bias coming out. And though I fight for it and identify as a woman, and I'm super passionate about that, I still had this sort of implicit bias, which caused me to think that all surgeons and like science fields are really for men. And so all of this really is to say, please do not feel badly about whatever responses you get, but more just that it really needs to, help to open our eyes and understand that even if we're fighting for all of these things, we can still have implicit bias. Awesome. Okay, so that gave you all some time, hopefully, to respond. I'd love to hear you all a little bit more. So one individual said that they took the gender and career IAT and the sexuality IAT. So the gender and career was basically whether or not you associate male with the sciences and women with the kind of humanities job. And this individual noted that they were neutral in the gender career, which actually surprised them considering their experiences. And then on sexuality, it said that their preference was strongly towards straight people. And this individual expressed that they wanted to retake it and felt upset with themselves. And so this individual, thank you so much for being so honest. And I do want to say that just because you got these results, it doesn't make you homophobic or transphobic. It just means that there's some sort of an implicit bias that we need to be aware of and understand that's going on, and we may not have, we taught ourselves or been taught this directly, but society promotes if you will, a straight agenda. So it's no wonder that you got this response. So thank you so much for your honesty. Another individual said that they took the gender, I believe the gender and career one, or just gender. You do have a preference for men or women, just as people in general. And it caught them off guard because the results for them were leaning towards men. And this individual said they felt a little defensive because they said they are very for equality. And awesome, I will say the same thing to you as well. Just because you got this response does not mean that you're sexist or you don't fight for equality or you don't do all of these things and have, really are really passionate about that and do great work. It really is just to say that these norms within society that, men are better or more capable, or as I thought, more likely to be surgeons, are just something that is ingrained in us on an everyday basis. We need to sometimes just take a step back and acknowledge that in order to move forward. So thank you so much to those individuals that shared. I really appreciate all of your honesty, because these IATs are not always easy, especially when you get results that really conflict with who or how you feel or how you view the world. Okay, so I want to provide you all with a little kind of mnemonic device for fighting unconscious bias, and that is detect, reflect, reject. So this was actually studied and developed by Dr. Patricia Devine. She is a social psychologist, and she's done a lot of work relating to discrimination and bias in psychology. And so she has, this comes from actually one of her main papers. If you do want to read the whole paper, please let me know and I can give you access to it. But she has actually kind of boiled it down into a little 1, 2, 3 step that you can think of to fight implicit bias in yourself on a daily basis. So one is detect. When you are walking down the street and perhaps you are well, I'll give you an example that I heard actually on, I'm a big NPR fan if you haven't noticed already, but on NPR was this man who was walking down the street and saw a black man turn the corner and an old lady was sitting on a bench, and he paused and was like, okay, I'm just going to wait around for a little bit longer because I don't know what this man's going to do. And then right around the corner came the man's son. And immediately, the man felt terrible because he actually had adopted a black child as well. And so he was just like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? This is not what I stand for. This is not what I, consciously want or think, but I still have this bias in me. And so the first step for him using this pattern is to detect, okay, I just had some biased thoughts, and that is, that's really just what happened. We need to detect it, identify it, and label it what it is. And then the next step is to really reflect. Reflect on how your experiences within your life, whether or not you know it, have shaped your lived experience to have you kind of think in this way or have these implicit biases. And then third is to reject the notion, and I often counterbalance it with some sort of logical or rational explanation, whatever you can think of, that statistically speaking, he is not more likely to hurt you than any other racial category. And so basically just to not harshly reject it. I don't really like the term reject, but that's the term she uses. Obviously, we need to reject it, but I think the biggest part is detecting, reflecting, and then I would say for number 3, kind of learning from that to move forward, and going forward and understanding that you may have that implicit bias, but the more you acknowledge it, the less it is going to impact you on your day-to-day basis. So how do we create safety and navigate challenging topics and biases, especially in our workplace, or when you all are giving NAMI Mental Health 101 presentations, or family to family, or conexiones, or all of the above. So the goal really is to create an environment in which people feel comfortable sharing. So I think a lot of you, well, maybe not, but I'm hoping that a lot of you have heard of the term safe space. It's become a very politically charged term as kind of an ultra-liberal term, and it's kind of often used to kind of describe, that sect of the population, if you will. But what I would say is that is a better term would be to create a proud space. And what that really means is a space where people feel able and proud to share about their cultural background and experiences, and they feel comfortable sharing those, and understanding that the name safe space is a little bit misleading, because when you're talking about racial topics of mental illness, socioeconomic issues, those are all really touchy subjects, and everyone may not be safe. You may have differing opinions. But to create a space in which people feel comfortable and proud of their heritage and their background and safe enough to share is really what we're ultimately striving towards. Another really good thing is to, while you are listening, try to be curious and open. Like the IATs, often when we are listening to people who have maybe differing views from us, we may start to become defensive. And it's really important to acknowledge when we are starting to become defensive, to take a deep breath and say, hey, I don't need to believe what they're telling me or go along with that or anything like that, but I do need to be curious and I need to be open. I need to listen to what they're saying, and so I can understand. Maybe that will change my mind and maybe it won't, but that's not really the point. The point is to listen actively and to learn from other people's experiences, whether or not you agree or disagree. And then we touched on this before, acknowledging differences and really avoiding that colorblind approach, because there are differences within our world and how people are treated, and we need to acknowledge those. And then finally, the most important thing I can say is to really try to understand how someone's past experiences may be affecting how they're engaging with you in the moment. And this could be as large as historical trauma, like I was talking about before, the impact of slavery on African American communities and genocide on Native communities, or it could be really, really simple. Say you get up and your alarm didn't go off, and you have to wake your kids up, and they're late for school, and then you're late for work, and then you get coffee but you spill it all over yourself, and then you are late for a meeting, and then after the meeting a coworker says, hey, could you help me stuff in these envelopes for our next event? And you may snap back, no, I don't want to help. And maybe if you had a better morning, you would have said, yeah, sure, I'm feeling good, I'll definitely help you pack those envelopes. But because you've had such a bad morning, that may be the last thing that you want to do. And of course, that doesn't excuse rude or mean behavior, but it simply is to say that we need to be aware of and understand how people's and our own lived experiences affect how we engage in every single moment, and will impact those moments, and that, it may not be us, as in the one that's, asking for help. The individual may not be angry at us, but maybe they've just had a really negative experience with, past organizations, or as simple as just having a bad morning. And ultimately, the main point to take away is really to focus on the relationship. That is learning about all the different, all of the different ideas that this other individual has, and staying with the process and not just focusing on the solution. We're not really trying to get to a solution of, okay, my culture is right and your culture is wrong, or this is the right way to think about it. We're more just trying to foster an open relationship so we can have discussions and hear from those other individuals. Okay. And then let me make sure I don't want to repeat things. So, this is a big one that I want to touch on for navigating bias. Sincere and real, we've touched on. Courage and honesty, reflect back what's being said. That's really important. But I think one thing that's really important, because we often try to stay away from this, is the making room for disagreements and conflicts. So a lot of times when we have an individual who maybe we're giving a presentation, I can give you an example. So this is actually an example from one of the other webinars, but it's this example where someone is giving a presentation on health disparities in the Black community, much like I touched on before. And so they give all these statistics, and then someone who identifies as Black raises their hand and says, thank you for your information, but I'm really tired of seeing all these statistics that are so negative about Black people, and you're not even taking into account racism and historical trauma and the impacts of slavery and all these other terrible racial injustices, and you're just putting these facts up there and basically painting this whole community as one, when we're really diverse, and that's not the truth. So if that had happened to you, you're probably going to be a bit taken aback, because this individual has kind of, in a way, derailed the whole part of your presentation. But instead of just saying, okay, I'll talk to you afterwards, or okay, thank you, and just moving on right away, it's really important to nurture these different thoughts and to be able to learn from them. Whether or not we consider them right or wrong, we need to make room for these conflicts, because if you just respond to her, oh, okay, well, we don't have time to touch on that now, I'll talk to you after, that individual is most likely going to feel really dismissed, and they're probably going to become a little bit angry because you've really just dismissed what they've said. So that is all to say, do not be afraid to go on a tangent. Do not be afraid to open it up to the room and say, thank you for your response. Is anyone else feeling like this? Because if one individual is feeling like that, it may be likely that there are other individuals, and really thanking them and honoring their experience, whether or not you personally agree with it, but using it to learn from and making that person feel heard, and so you're really respecting them. And ultimately, I think navigating bias, one of the biggest things is this last point, which kind of wraps it all up, which is that you can listen, and you can be a respectful listener and hear people out and have a conversation with them. It doesn't mean you have to take on the same worldview as them or the same opinion as them. Being open and respectful and listening does not mean that you automatically are adapting to whatever that person's thought. And it's okay to disagree, but that is really the main point, is to just create a space where individuals feel comfortable and proud of their backgrounds and proud to share their thoughts. So I want to hear from all of you. We are almost done, but I'd love to know if any of you all have any other comments or questions for me, or something we could maybe bring up for discussion. So there's a couple of questions, but I really don't want to limit you to any sort of questions. So if you have any sort of general questions, or maybe an experience that you've had in the past with, either facilitating and something kind of went awry because of kind of issues of, cultural competency or maybe lack thereof, or maybe the IATs, or really really anything that you want to bring up, or, ideas for applying this to your work, please go ahead and type them into the question box, and I would love to have a little discussion with you all. I'm just going to see if there's any other questions. I believe yes, there we go. But please feel free to just answer or ask any of these questions. Yes, how can you use what was discussed? What aspects of this webinar have you felt had the strongest impact on you? If you want to share that. And yeah, so really any sort of thoughts. This is our final portion, so if you have any questions or thoughts, please type them in now and we can talk. Okay, so one individual has said, that this webinar has been their favorite, so thank you so much. This is my favorite webinar too. So right now we only have one of these webinars scheduled, but I'm hoping to change that because this is, I think, the most powerful and useful webinar. So thank you so much for your positive feedback. Negative feedback or constructive criticism is also more than welcome. We always want to make this better. Okay, another individual said, recognizing that experiences shape our biases, and we may have to go back and reorient ourselves with the understanding of our biases. I think this individual put that perfectly. Yes, because, you did not purposely learn, racism or inequality, or I'm assuming that most of you did not, because you're all working at NAMI and are all people, that really share some similar goals about equality. And so I think that's awesome to, not be so harsh on yourself, but I really like that term, to go back and reorient with the understanding that we have these biases that we need to account for. So thank you. Okay, so another individual said, thank you for helping me recognize my implicit biases and learn to deal with them effectively. Awesome, I'm so glad. Yes, detect, reflect, reject. Remember that little saying for when you think of that. Another individual said, I have had the personal experience of being discriminated against for being a Jew, because people have assumed that Jews are good salespeople, quote unquote, or clever, quote unquote, and so on. It is an awful feeling to experience discrimination. Yes, I would definitely agree with you. And I think for those of you that have dealt with experiences of discrimination, you may be more easily able to employ that empathy with other people, because you know it. You don't know the exact feeling of another person's experience, but you've felt that pain before, and that stereotyping, and that can be really powerful, even though it's really negative. But if we can turn that negative experience into something that can help us better work with other people and really help them, I think that can be something that you can get that's positive out of it, and hopefully help other people to not experience that in the future. So thank you so much. Another individual said that they really liked the detect, reflect, and reject method when dealing with bias. Yes, I really like it because I think it's so easy, and I've used it myself when I'm thinking like, Catherine, what? No, that's not an okay thought. And instead of, beating myself up about it, I'm like, okay, I need to detect it, reflect on that, and okay, that's not true. And I know why, because X, Y, and Z. So awesome. I'm glad you liked that. Hopefully that will be useful. Please spread this knowledge with other people, because it's so important. These cultural competency webinars are so awesome. I think they would be way more powerful. I wish I was with you all doing this in person. So hopefully in the future we will be able to do that. But please spread the message of this, because it can really help other people, hopefully. Another individual said, now we need to be accountable for what we have learned and really implement it. Thank you for the information you shared. Wonderful. Thank you so much. I feel like I'm tooting my own horn reading these positive comments, but that's great that this is going to be helpful for you all. So awesome. And another one is, yes, I am very empathetic to others because of my experiences with being discriminated against myself. Awesome. So this was the same individual that discussed being discriminated against because they're Jewish. And yeah, I think that's so true. And if perhaps you haven't had an experience where you felt some sort of bias or discrimination, I think just talking with others and, like we said, being a really, open and empathetic listener can really help you to you're not going to experience obviously the same thing, but can be really powerful to listen to someone else's experience of discrimination and hear from them, what do they wish, bystanders had done in the moment to maybe help them, or, what do they think that they could have done. So yes. Okay, awesome. Okay. And so it looks like we had some technological difficulties with the poll. I sincerely apologize. Yes, I will thank you so much for this feedback. So next time I will explain more about the polling because I explained in the beginning, and then it's very difficult for people that come in late if I'm not explaining that. So thank you so much for that feedback. I really appreciate that. That's very helpful, especially because the polls are really a powerful tool, and I do want everyone to be able to use them. So I'll definitely take note of that. Thank you. So please keep the comments, questions coming. I am going to stay online for the next 5 or 10 minutes, depending on if individuals are still typing questions or comments. But I want to thank you all so much for participating. I know you all, especially if you're working here at NAMI or volunteering, you are doing so much already. And oftentimes cultural competency can seem kind of like this, one more thing that you have to do. So thank you so much for taking time out of your day to dedicate to cultural competency. I really hope that it will benefit you. We do have some other cultural competency webinars coming up as well. We also have I'm in the process of updating NAMI California's Cultural and Linguistic Responsiveness Toolkits. We do have some webinars that are kind of outlining what that is, and that's really like a longer toolkit to try and help affiliates and provide them with strategies to engage with different communities. So we'll also have some of those coming up. As well, I do want to give a little shout out to the Multicultural Symposium, which is going to be happening on Thursday, May 31st in Monterey. It is at the same location as the conference. It is the day before the conference and is free to attend. It's going to be a really awesome event. We're bringing in leaders from the community and from counties who are working on basically engaging and reducing healthcare disparities for unserved and underserved populations, so especially diverse communities. And so it's really going to be a day of talking about how to best serve different cultural groups through NAMI and what is kind of already being done and how everyone can get involved. And I'm going to be sending out an email. I'll send out information on all of that as well. I will be sending out a brief post survey. So if you have any other feedback, that is going to be completely anonymous. So if you didn't feel comfortable giving feedback with your name attached to it on here, you can do so on the post survey. I'll email that out tomorrow morning. And at this time, I just wanted to say thank you so much, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening. If you need to go, we are done, but I will stick around to see if there's any other questions. Awesome. Okay, so I've had a couple of questions, and thank you. I knew I would forget at the end of this, so thank you for reminding me. The individuals who need to receive certificates for participating today. Let me go to the screen where my email address is. So all you need to do is email me. My email address is right there, Catherine@namica.org. Let me know that you are one of the individuals who is in need of the cultural competency training certificate, and I will go ahead and get that started. I'm going to just cross-reference it with my webinar data just to make sure you actually did attend, but if you attended, there will be no problem. And so then at that point, I'll be able to develop the certificate for you and provide that for you as well. I'm going to be sending, like I said, a follow-up email tomorrow, and I will also include a little blurb reminding you that if you need a certificate for attending this webinar, to just shoot me back an email, because I don't have a list of all those individuals. So you can just email me or respond to my email that you all will be getting tomorrow.